Show me what that thing between your legs does. The words echoed through the cavernous chamber of the Gamelon starship, silencing the assembled diplomats. Keith Harris, Earth's chosen representative, felt his face flush as all eyes turned to him. The beautiful alien female, Spica, daughter of the Gamelon ambassador, stared at him with unabashed curiosity, her large, mesmerizing eyes fixed on his lower body. It was the year 2175, and humanity's first contact with an alien race had just taken an unexpected turn. The massive Gamelon vessel had entered Earth's orbit mere days ago, its sudden appearance sending shockwaves through human society. Keith, a 28-year-old diplomat, had been thrust into the spotlight as Earth's envoy to these technologically advanced beings. As he stood aboard the alien ship, surrounded by blue-skinned, pointed-eared Gamelons, Keith was acutely aware of the vast differences between their species. The stark contrasts in physiology were apparent, but it was Spica's bold question that truly highlighted the gulf between their cultures. The Gamelon ambassador, his iridescent blue skin flushing a deeper shade, quickly intervened. "I apologize for my daughter's forwardness," he said, embarrassment evident in his voice. "Our species reproduces through a complex spore-based system. We have no concept of whatever it is you humans do." Keith's mind raced. This incident threatened to derail the crucial diplomatic talks, but it also presented an opportunity. Earth needed this alliance desperately, especially with the looming threat of the hostile Zeron race. Could explaining human reproduction be the key to fostering understanding between their species? As Keith contemplated his response, he became aware of the tension in the room. Conservative elements within both human and Gamelon delegations shifted uncomfortably, clearly opposed to any discussion of mating practices. Yet the fate of both species might hinge on bridging this gap in understanding. The human diplomat took a deep breath, weighing his words carefully. He needed to navigate this delicate situation while also uncovering the true motives behind the Gamelon's sudden appearance on Earth. Their advanced technology and the timing of their arrival raised questions that needed answers. Spica's gaze remained fixed on Keith, her curiosity undiminished. Her continued interest in human physiology could prove to be both an opportunity and a complication for his mission. As he prepared to speak, Keith realized that his explanation of human reproduction might be the first step in a much larger journey of mutual understanding. Little did Keith know that the Gamelons harbored a secret of their own. Their race was dying, and they believed human genetics held the key to their survival. The stakes were higher than anyone realized, with the fate of both humanity and the Gamelons hanging in the balance. As Keith opened his mouth to begin his explanation, he felt the weight of two civilizations on his shoulders. His words would not only shape the future of human-Gamelon relations, but could also determine Earth's role in a larger galactic conflict. The chamber fell silent, all eyes on the human diplomat as he prepared to bridge the gap between two worlds, one careful word at a time. Keith took a steadying breath, his mind racing to formulate a response that would satisfy Spica's curiosity without offending the sensibilities of the assembled diplomats. Before he could speak, however, the Gamelon ambassador intervened once more. "Perhaps," he said, his voice tinged with both embarrassment and diplomatic pragmatism, "we should continue this discussion in a more private setting. Keith Harris, would you join me in my chambers?" Grateful for the momentary reprieve, Keith nodded. "Of course, Ambassador. I'd be honored." As they exited the cavernous chamber, Keith felt the weight of countless eyes upon him. The gravity of his role as Earth's representative had never felt more palpable. The ambassador's private chambers were a stark contrast to the grand hall they'd just left. Intimate and softly lit, the room hummed with the gentle purr of advanced Gamelon technology. The ambassador gestured for Keith to take a seat in a peculiar undulating chair that seemed to mold itself to his body. "I must apologize again for my daughter's outburst," the ambassador began, his iridescent skin shifting hues as he spoke. "But I'm afraid there's more to discuss than mere cultural misunderstandings." Keith leaned forward, his diplomatic instincts on high alert. "I'm listening, Ambassador." The Gamelon's eyes, large and luminous, fixed on Keith with an intensity that made him shiver. "Our arrival on Earth was not by chance, Mr. Harris. We are facing a crisis that threatens the very existence of our species. As the ambassador explained the gamelon's reproductive predicament, Keith felt a mix of sympathy and apprehension. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Earth's potential role in saving an alien species could reshape the future of both civilizations. We believe, the ambassador continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, that human DNA might hold the key to our survival. But to unlock that key, we need to understand your methods of reproduction. Keith's mind raced, processing the enormity of this information. The fate of an entire species potentially rested on humanity's willingness to share its most intimate biological knowledge. The diplomatic, ethical, and scientific ramifications were overwhelming. Before Keith could formulate a response, a soft chime echoed through the chamber. The ambassador's daughter, Spica, entered, her large eyes immediately locking onto Keith. "Father," she said, her melodious voice filled with a mixture of contrition and grit, "I wish to make amends for my earlier behavior. Perhaps I could give our guest a tour of our vessel." The ambassador hesitated, his gaze shifting between his daughter and Keith. After a moment, he nodded. "Very well. Mr. Harris, would you be amenable to this?" Keith recognized the opportunity this presented, a chance to learn more about the gamelons, their technology, and perhaps find a way to bridge the vast cultural divide between their species. "I would be honored," he replied. As Keith followed Spica through the winding corridors of the gamelon ship, he marveled at the alien architecture and advanced technology surrounding them. Spica's enthusiasm was infectious as she explained the various functions of their systems, her earlier embarrassment seemingly forgotten. Their tour eventually led them to the human diplomatic quarters. As they entered, Keith felt a sudden wave of homesickness wash over him. The familiar Earth furnishings stood in stark contrast to the alien environment outside. "I hope these accommodations are satisfactory," Spica said, her eyes roaming curiously over the human artifacts. "They're perfect, thank you," Keith replied, moving towards a small desk to remove his formal jacket. As he turned back, he realized with a start that Spica had followed him into the room, her gaze fixed intently on his form. Before Keith could react, Spica's hand reached out, her slender blue fingers brushing against his chest. "Your structure is so different," she murmured, fascination evident in her voice. Keith froze, acutely aware of the diplomatic minefield he was navigating. Spica's touch, while innocent in its curiosity, sent a jolt through his system. He gently stepped back, trying to maintain a professional demeanor. "Spica, I think it's important that we discuss the boundaries of our different cultures," he began carefully. But Spica's attention had already shifted. Her eyes widened as she noticed a datapad on the desk, displaying information about human biology. "Is this how your species reproduces?" she asked, her voice a mixture of shock and intrigue. Keith realized that this moment could be pivotal in fostering understanding between their species. Taking a deep breath, he decided to seize the opportunity. "Spica, I have a proposal," he said, his mind quickly formulating a plan. "What if we were to create a cultural exchange program, a way for humans and gamelons to study and learn from each other, particularly in the fields of biology and genetics?" Spica's eyes lit up with excitement. "That sounds fascinating. But do you think our leaders would agree to such a thing?" As Keith began to outline his idea in more detail, he felt a glimmer of hope. This could be the key to not only solving the gamelon's reproductive crisis, but also to forging a lasting alliance between their species. Little did he know that this proposal would soon face challenges from both worlds, testing the limits of diplomacy and pushing him to the forefront of an interstellar crisis. As Keith began to outline his idea for a cultural exchange program, Spica's eyes lit up with excitement. The prospect of learning more about human biology and genetics seemed to captivate her, and Keith sensed an opportunity to bridge the gap between their species. "I believe this could be the key to solving both our immediate concerns and fostering long-term understanding between our peoples," Keith explained, his voice filled with growing enthusiasm. "We could establish a joint research facility on a neutral planet where scientists from both Earth and Gamelon could work together to study our physiological differences and similarities." Spica nodded eagerly, her iridescent skin shimmering with interest. "That sounds fascinating, but do you think our leaders would agree to such a proposal?" Keith's response was interrupted by a soft chime. The door to his quarters slid open, revealing the imposing figure of the Gamilon ambassador. "I couldn't help but overhear," the ambassador said, his voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "Your idea is intriguing, Mr. Harris. Perhaps we should discuss this further with your superiors." In the weeks that followed, Keith's proposal gained traction among both human and Gamilon leadership. Despite initial skepticism and resistance from conservative factions on both sides, the potential benefits of such collaboration were too significant to ignore. Finally, after intense negotiations and planning, the joint scientific expedition was approved. The newly christened Harmony Base was established on a habitable moon, orbiting a gas giant in a nearby star system. As the sleek interspecies vessel carrying the research team approached their destination, Keith stood at a viewport, taking in the sight of their new home. "It's beautiful," Spica said, appearing beside him. Over the course of their journey, they had spent considerable time together, their initial awkwardness giving way to a deepening bond and mutual fascination. Keith nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. And now the real work begins. Upon landing, the team quickly set about establishing their research facilities. The base consisted of interconnected biodomes, each simulating different Earth and Gamilon environments. Keith marveled at the seamless integration of human and Gamilon technology, even as he noted the challenges that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, Keith found himself constantly mediating between the human and Gamilon scientists. Their vastly different approaches to research and technology often led to heated debates and misunderstandings. "No, no, no!" Dr. Eliza Chen, the lead human geneticist, exclaimed in frustration. She gestured at the holographic display of DNA sequences floating before her. "The Gamilon approach to gene sequencing is completely incompatible with our equipment." Her Gamilon counterpart, Dr. Zan, bristled at the criticism. "Our methods are far more advanced than your primitive techniques," he retorted, his skin flushing a deep blue. Keith stepped between them, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Both approaches have merit," he said calmly. "Why don't we try combining elements of both? Dr. Chen, could you explain the benefits of your sequencing method? And Dr. Zan, perhaps you could demonstrate how your technology might enhance those results?" Slowly but surely, through patience and persistence, Keith helped the two teams find common ground. As they began to work together more effectively, breakthroughs followed. One evening, as Keith was reviewing the day's research data in his quarters, a soft knock at his door pulled his attention away from his work. He opened it to find Spica standing there, her large eyes gleaming with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "Keith," she said, her voice filled with almost unchecked excitement, "I was wondering if you could give me a tour of the human living quarters. I'm fascinated by how your species structures its personal spaces." Surprised but intrigued, Keith agreed. As they walked through the human section of the base, Spica's curiosity seemed insatiable. She asked about every object, every piece of furniture, trying to understand the intricacies of human daily life. As they passed one of the scientists' quarters, Spica's keen eyes spotted something on a shelf. "What are those?" she asked, pointing to a stack of colorful books. Keith squinted to read the titles, then felt a blush creep up his neck. "Oh, those are, romance novels. Just some light reading material the crew brought along." Spica's eyes widened with interest. "Romance? Is that related to your species' reproductive practices?" Before Keith could formulate a response, alarms began blaring throughout the base. Red warning lights flashed in the corridors, and a computerized voice echoed through the speakers. "Warning! Environmental systems compromised in Biodome C. All personnel report to emergency stations." Keith's heart raced as he quickly led Spica towards the central control room. As they ran, they could hear shouts and the sound of running feet echoing through the corridors. Upon reaching the control room, they found it in chaos. Scientists from both species were frantically working at consoles, trying to stabilize the failing systems. "What happened?" Keith demanded, approaching the lead engineer. "Sabotage," the engineer replied grimly. "Someone deliberately damaged the atmospheric regulator in Biodome C. We're losing pressure and temperature control." Keith's mind reeled at the implications. Who would want to sabotage their mission? And why? As he scanned the room, he noticed one face conspicuously absent. "Where's Dr. Zorn?" he asked, suddenly suspicious of the reclusive human scientist who had been vocal in his opposition to the joint research project. Before anyone could answer, a security officer burst into the room. "Sir, Dr. Zorn has been spotted trying to access the data core. He's attempting to destroy our research." Without hesitation, Keith sprang into action. "Lock down the data core. I'm going after him." He turned to Spica, whose face was a mask of shock and willpower. "Spica, stay here and help coordinate the repair efforts. We can't lose that biodome." As Keith raced out of the control room in pursuit of the saboteur, he could hear Spica calling out behind him, "Be careful, Keith." The chase was on, with the fate of Harmony Base, the research project, and possibly the future of human-Gamelon relations hanging in the balance. Keith's heart pounded as he sprinted through the corridors, knowing that every second counted in this race against time. Time. Keith's pulse raced as he sprinted through the winding corridors of Harmony Base, his footsteps echoing off the metallic walls. The blaring alarms and flashing red lights only added to the chaos as he pursued Dr. Zorn. Rounding a corner, Keith caught a glimpse of the rogue scientist disappearing into the data core chamber. He quickened his pace, knowing that every second counted. As he burst through the door, he found Dr. Zorn hunched over a console, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Step away from the console, Dr. Zorn!" Keith shouted, his voice barely audible over the alarms. The scientist spun around, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You don't understand, Harris. This research is an abomination. It will be the end of humanity as we know it." Before Keith could respond, a familiar blue figure appeared beside him. Spica had followed, her face set with drive. "We won't let you destroy our work," she declared, her melodious voice filled with steel. Together, Keith and Spica advanced on Dr. Zorn, who backed away from the console. In a desperate move, the scientist lunged for an emergency release valve on a nearby wall panel. Keith reacted instantly, tackling Dr. Zorn to the ground before he could reach it. As Keith subdued the saboteur, Spica rushed to the console. Her slender blue fingers danced across the interface, undoing the damage Dr. Zorn had started. "I've secured the data core," she announced, relief evident in her voice. With Dr. Zorn restrained, Keith activated his communicator. "Security team to the data core chamber. We have the saboteur in custody." As they waited for security to arrive, Keith turned his attention to the base-wide alert still blaring through the speakers. "We need to get to the environmental control room," he said urgently. "Biodome C is still in critical condition." Leaving Dr. Zorn in the custody of the arriving security team, Keith and Spica raced to the environmental control room. The scene that greeted them was one of controlled chaos, with human and Gamelon scientists working side by side to stabilize the failing systems. Keith quickly assessed the situation, his eyes scanning the various readouts and displays. "The atmospheric regulator is the key," he said, pointing to a schematic on the main screen. "If we can bypass the damaged circuits and reroute power through the auxiliary systems, we might be able to restore functionality." Spica nodded, her large eyes narrowing in concentration. "I can recalibrate the Gamelon biotechnology to interface with your systems," she offered. "It should provide the boost we need to stabilize the environment." Without hesitation, they set to work. Keith's fingers flew over the human console, rerouting power and bypassing damaged systems. Beside him, Spica interfaced with the Gamelon biotech, her movements graceful and precise. The minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow as they worked. The warning klaxons, a constant reminder of the lives at stake. Sweat beaded on Keith's forehead, and he could see the strain etched on Spica's face as well. Suddenly, a series of green lights flickered to life on the main display. The alarms fell silent, replaced by a computerized voice announcing, "Environmental systems stabilized. Biodome C returning to normal parameters." A collective cheer went up from the assembled scientists. Keith let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, sagging against the console in relief. Beside him, Spica's skin shimmered with a vibrant blue that he had come to associate with joy. "We did it," she said softly, her eyes meeting Keith's. The aftermath of the crisis brought a palpable change to the atmosphere of Harmony Base. The shared experience of averting disaster seemed to dissolve many of the remaining barriers between the human and Gamelon team members. Where once there had been suspicion and cultural misunderstandings, now there was a growing sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. In the days that followed, Keith observed with satisfaction as human and Gamelon scientists worked together with renewed vigor. The integration of their different approaches and technologies, which had once been a source of frustration, now became a wellspring of innovation. It was during one of these collaborative sessions that Dr. Chen made a startling announcement. "I think we've found something," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "A way to create viable human Gamelon hybrid embryos." The room fell silent as Dr. Chen and her Gamelon counterpart, Dr. Zan, explained their findings. By combining human DNA with modified Gamelon spores, they had discovered a method that could potentially allow for the creation of a new, genetically diverse population. As the implications of this breakthrough sank in, the room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Some scientists expressed awe and excitement at the potential, while others voiced concerns about the ethical implications of such a radical genetic manipulation. Keith found himself at the center of the debate, with both human and Gamelon team members looking to him for guidance. As he listened to the arguments from both sides, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision before him. "This could be the key to saving the Gamelon species," Dr. Zan argued passionately, "and it might give us the genetic diversity we need to face the Zeron threat." Dr. Chen countered, "But we can't ignore the potential consequences. We're talking about creating an entirely new form of life. Are we prepared for the responsibility that comes with that?" As the debate raged on, Keith noticed Spica standing quietly at the edge of the group, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, she gave him a small nod and slipped out of the room. Later that evening, as Keith sat in his quarters, wrestling with the implications of the day's events, a soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Spica, her large eyes filled with an intensity that made Keith's breath catch. "I have a proposition," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to volunteer for an experiment, to be the first Gamelon to attempt human-like reproduction." Keith stared at her, stunned. "Spica, do you understand what you're suggesting?" She stepped closer, her iridescent skin shimmering in the low light. "I do, and I want you to be the human partner in this experiment, Keith." Before Keith could formulate a response, his communicator chirped urgently. A message scrolled across the screen, marked with the highest priority. His eyes widened as he read its contents. "We're being recalled to Earth," he said, looking up at Spica. "The United Earth Government and the Gamelon High Council want us to present our findings and defend our research." Spica's expression hardened with drive. "Then we'll go together. We'll show them the importance of what we're doing here." As they began to plan for their journey back to Earth, neither of them could have anticipated the challenges that lay ahead. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and the decisions they would make in the coming days would shape the future of both humanity and the Gamelons for generations to come. The journey back to Earth was tense, filled with anticipation and uncertainty. As their ship docked at the orbital station, Keith and Spica exchanged a meaningful glance. They knew the weight of their research and the potential it held for both their species. Upon disembarking, they were immediately greeted by a contingent of stern-faced officials, both human and Gamelon. Without a word, they were ushered into a sleek transport shuttle that whisked them down to the planet's surface. The high-security facility loomed before them, a towering edifice of gleaming metal and reinforced glass. As they were escorted through a series of checkpoints, Keith felt the pressure mounting. He glanced at Spica, her blue skin shimmering slightly in the artificial light, and saw his own apprehension mirrored in her large, expressive eyes. The council chamber was an impressive circular room with tiered seating surrounding a central platform. As Keith and Spica took their places, they found themselves under the scrutiny of dozens of eyes, human and Gamelon alike. Keith stepped forward, activating the holographic display. He began his presentation, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "Distinguished members of the Council, We come before you today with a breakthrough that could change the course of both our species' futures. As he spoke, detailing their findings on human gamelon hybrid embryos, he could see the reactions rippling through the audience. Some leaned forward, intrigued, while others recoiled, their faces twisted in disgust or fear. Spica joined him, her melodious voice adding depth to their presentation as she explained the genetic intricacies of their work. By combining human DNA with modified gamelon spores, we've discovered a method to create a new, genetically diverse population. This could be the key to saving the gamelon species from extinction and providing both our races with the diversity needed to combat the Zeron threat. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices as soon as they finished. A human counselor stood, his face red with anger. "This is an abomination. We cannot allow the pollution of the human genome with alien DNA." A gamelon representative countered, her voice sharp. "And what of our people? Would you condemn us to extinction out of fear and ignorance?" As the debate raged, Keith noticed Admiral Hawkins rise from his seat. The room fell silent as the imposing figure made his way to the central platform. "There's more to consider here," he began, his voice grave. "I must now reveal the existence of Project Prometheus." Keith listened in stunned silence as the Admiral explained the weapon they had developed against the Zyrlons and the potential for combining it with the hybrid program. The implications were staggering, and he could see the council members grappling with the ethical considerations. Before any consensus could be reached, alarms blared throughout the facility. The main doors burst open, and a group of armed individuals stormed in, led by a face Keith recognized with shock: Dr. Zorn. "Death to the alien sympathizers!" Zorn shouted, raising a weapon. Chaos erupted. Keith's military training kicked in, and he quickly assessed the situation. "Spica, with me!" he called out, guiding her towards a nearby console for cover. He could see gamelon guards moving to protect their representatives, while human security forces engaged the attackers. As they crouched behind the console, Keith's mind raced. They needed to protect the research data. It was too valuable to lose. He spotted a computer terminal across the room, near a door labeled Laboratory. "We need to get to that terminal," he told Spica, gesturing towards it. "We can upload the data to a secure server from there." They made a dash for it, ducking and weaving through the firefight. Once inside the lab, Keith immediately began the upload process. But a warning flashed on the screen. "It's going to take time we don't have," he muttered, hearing the sounds of battle growing closer. Spica's eyes widened suddenly. "I have an idea," she said, her voice urgent. "We can use a modified version of our reproductive spores to create a barrier. But I'll need your help, your DNA." Understanding dawned on Keith. Without hesitation, he nodded. "Let's do it." Working quickly, they combined their genetic material in a solution Spica prepared. As the lab doors began to buckle under the assault of the attackers, Spica activated her bioluminescent abilities, infusing the solution with energy. A shimmering, translucent barrier sprang into existence around the terminal, glowing with an otherworldly light. The doors burst open, and the attackers rushed in, only to stop short at the sight of the pulsating shield. The momentary distraction was all the security forces needed. They swarmed into the room, quickly subduing Zorn and his accomplices. As the immediate danger passed, Keith and Spica became aware of the stunned silence that had fallen over the chamber. Council members and security personnel alike stared in awe at the glowing barrier, a living testament to the potential of human gamelon cooperation. Admiral Hawkins stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the shimmering shield. "I believe," he said slowly, "we have just witnessed the future of both our species." The mood in the chamber shifted palpably. Where there had been division and suspicion, now there was a growing sense of possibility. As discussions resumed, with a new focus on integrating the hybrid program with Project Prometheus, Keith and Spica shared a quiet moment. "We did it," Keith said softly, still scarcely believing what had transpired. Spica nodded, her skin shimmering with a mix of emotions. "We did, but I fear this is only the beginning." As if in answer to her words, an aide rushed into the chamber, his face pale. "Urgent news from Deep Space Monitoring," he announced breathlessly. "The Zerlon fleet, they're on the move. heading straight for Earth. The council chamber erupted once more, but this time with a unified purpose. The debate was over. Now it was time for action. The council chamber fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. The Zeron fleet's approach changed everything. Admiral Hawkins was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying an urgency that galvanized the room. "We don't have the luxury of debate anymore," he declared. "What we've just witnessed here," he gestured to the still shimmering barrier created by Keith and Spica, "could be our best hope for survival." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Emergency sessions were called, votes were cast, and by nightfall a decision had been reached. The Council approved an accelerated hybrid program in conjunction with Project Prometheus, marking a new era in human Gamelon cooperation. Keith found himself thrust into the role of human liaison for a newly formed joint task force, with Spica representing Gamelon interest. As they left the council chambers, both still reeling from the day's events, Spica turned to Keith, her large eyes reflecting a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Are you ready for this?" she asked softly. Keith took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "I don't think anyone can be fully ready for something like this. But we don't have a choice. We have to make it work." The following weeks were a blur of activity. A new research facility was established on a secure military base, combining the most advanced technologies of both species. Keith and Spica found themselves at the center of intense scientific scrutiny, their successful genetic fusion becoming the template for further experiments. One morning, as Keith entered the medical wing for yet another round of tests, he noticed an unusual buzz of excitement among the staff. Dr. Chen approached him, her eyes wide with wonder. "Keith, you need to see this," she said, leading him to a holographic display. "We've been analyzing the changes in Spica's physiology since your DNA combination. Look at her reproductive system." Keith stared at the rotating 3D image, trying to make sense of the complex biological structures. "What am I looking at exactly?" Dr. Chen's voice trembled slightly as she explained. "Spica's body is adapting. It's developing structures analogous to a human uterus. She's becoming capable of human-like gestation." The implications hit Keith like a physical blow. He steadied himself against a nearby console, his pupils dilating. "You mean Spica could carry a hybrid child?" Before Dr. Chen could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Keith's communicator chirped urgently. Admiral Hawkins's voice came through, tense and clipped. "Report to the command center immediately. We've detected unusual energy signatures from the Zeron fleet." Keith hurried to the command center, finding it abuzz with activity. Large screens displayed real-time data from deep space monitoring stations. Spica was already there, her skin shimmering with an agitated pattern. Admiral Hawkins turned to them as they approached. "The Zerlins are adapting their technology. We believe they may be aware of our preparations, possibly even Project Prometheus." Keith felt a chill run down his spine. "How is that possible?" "We don't know," Hawkins admitted, "but it means we need to accelerate our plans. The first batch of volunteer soldiers for the hybrid program arrives tomorrow. You two will be overseeing their training and adaptation process." As if on cue, a junior officer approached with a datapad. "Sir, we've compiled the list of volunteers." Keith took the pad, scrolling through the names and faces of brave individuals from both species who had agreed to undergo genetic modification. The weight of their trust settled heavily on his shoulders. Spica leaned in, her voice low. "They're placing their lives in our hands, Keith. We can't let them down." The next day, as the first group of volunteers arrived at the facility, Keith and Spica stood side by side to greet them. Humans and Gamelons, once enemies, now united in a common cause. As Keith looked at their determined faces, he felt a glimmer of hope. One of the human volunteers, a young woman with fierce eyes, stepped forward. "Is it true," she asked, her gaze moving between Keith and Spica, "about the two of you, that you've already combined?" Keith felt Spica's hand brush against his, a silent show of support. He nodded. "Yes, it's true. We're here to guide you through this process, to help you understand what you're about to experience." As the days passed, Keith and Spica worked tirelessly with the volunteers, overseeing their genetic modifications and training. The first attempts to combine human DNA with gamelon biology were challenging, with several failed experiments and setbacks. But with each failure came new insights, and slowly progress began to emerge. One evening, as Keith and Spica were reviewing data from the day's experiments, Dr. Chen entered the lab, her face pale. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about Spica's latest medical examination." Keith felt his heart rate quicken. "What is it? Is something wrong?" Dr. Chen shook her head, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "Not wrong exactly, but unexpected." She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Spica's. "Spica, you're pregnant. You're carrying a human gamelon hybrid child." The room fell silent, the implications of this revelation hanging heavy in the air. Keith turned to Spica, seeing his own shock mirrored in her luminous eyes. As the first of its kind, their unborn child represented both the potential and the risks of human gamelon integration. As the news sank in, alarms blared once again. Admiral Hawkins's voice came over the intercom, urgent and commanding. "All personnel to battle stations. We've detected a Zeron scout ship entering the solar system. This is not a drill." Keith and Spica exchanged a look of drive. The future of both their species, and now their child, hung in the balance. The real test was about to begin. The real test was about to unfold, and they needed to be ready. As the facility mobilized for battle, Keith and Spica shared a brief, intense moment. Their eyes met, conveying a mix of fear, drive, and something deeper, a connection that had grown far beyond what either of them had anticipated when this journey began. "We'll talk about this later," Keith said softly, squeezing Spica's hand. She nodded, her skin pulsing with a pattern that Keith had come to recognize as a mix of anxiety and dedication. Weeks passed in a blur of preparation and heightened alert. The Zeron scout ship had retreated, but everyone knew it was just the beginning. As Earth and gamelon forces worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses, an unexpected development demanded Keith and Spica's attention. Dr. Chen approached them one morning, her face a mask of professional concern. "We need to discuss Spica's pregnancy," she said, leading them to a private consultation room. Once inside, Dr. Chen activated a holographic display showing a series of complex bio-readings. "The fetus is developing at an unprecedented rate," she explained, her voice a mix of awe and worry. "At this pace, we're looking at a gestation period of months rather than years." Keith felt his chest tighten. "Is that safe?" he asked, glancing at Spica. Dr. Chen's expression was grave. "We're in uncharted territory here. We need to monitor the situation closely and be prepared for any eventuality." As they grappled with this news, reports came in from the hybrid soldier training program. The first batch had completed their initial training with the Prometheus weapons, and the results were promising. Keith observed a demonstration, watching with a mix of pride and unease as the hybrid soldiers effortlessly wielded technology that had once seemed impossibly advanced. However, the success was short-lived. During a high-intensity combat simulation, one of the hybrid soldiers collapsed, their body convulsing as it struggled to cope with the strain of their altered genetics. Keith rushed to the soldier's side, helping the medical team stabilize them. In the aftermath of the incident, Keith found himself in a heated debate with military leaders. "We can't deploy these soldiers until we understand the risks," he argued, his voice rising. "We need more testing, more safeguards." Admiral Hawkins frowned, his weathered face creased with worry. "Time is a luxury we don't have, Captain," he countered. "The Zeron fleet is advancing. We need every advantage we can get." As they argued, an alarm blared through the facility. The deep space monitoring stations had detected a massive energy surge. The Zeron fleet had entered the solar system and was accelerating towards Earth. In the chaos that followed, Operation Starburst was initiated. A joint task force of human and gamelon ships was hastily assembled, equipped with prototype Prometheus weapons. Despite Keith's objections, the first wave of hybrid soldiers was assigned to the mission. Torn between his duties and his concern for Spica and their unborn child, Keith made a difficult decision. I'm going with them, he told Spica, his voice heavy with drive. They need someone who understands both sides of this technology. Spica's skin rippled with a complex pattern of emotions. I understand, she said softly. I'll coordinate from mission control. We'll face this threat together, even if we're apart. As final preparations for the launch were underway, alarm klaxons suddenly blared throughout the spaceport. Security feeds showed a group of armed intruders forcing their way into the facility. Human extremists, Admiral Hawkins growled, watching the feeds. They're trying to sabotage the launch. Keith sprang into action, assembling a rapid response team. They raced through the sprawling complex, engaging in intense firefights with the saboteurs. The din of energy weapons and explosions echoed through the cavernous launch bays as Keith and his team fought to protect the vital ships and equipment. In a heart-stopping moment, Keith spotted a saboteur planting an explosive device on a key vessel. He sprinted across the open space, dodging weapons fire, and tackled the extremists just as they were about to activate the device. They grappled on the ground, Keith's enhanced strength giving him the edge as he subdued the attacker. When the dust settled, the saboteurs had been neutralized, but not without cost. Several ships were damaged, and numerous personnel lay injured. The launch preparations, already on a tight schedule, were thrown into disarray. Despite the setbacks, the joint fleet finally lifted off, carrying the hopes of two civilizations. As they journeyed towards their confrontation with the Zerlins, Keith noticed something peculiar about the hybrid soldiers on board. Their abilities seemed to be evolving, growing stronger and more refined with each passing day. Back on Earth, Spica coordinated the complex dance of human and Gamelon forces from mission control. Her unique perspective proved invaluable in bridging the gap between the two species' tactics and technologies. But as she worked tirelessly to support the mission, Spica felt a sudden sharp pain that nearly brought her to her knees. The medical team rushed to her aid, their faces grim as they assessed her condition. Dr. Elena Rossi, a brilliant human geneticist, exchanged worried glances with Dr. Zax, a renowned Gamelon reproductive specialist. The accelerated development is putting immense strain on her body, Dr. Rossi explained, her voice tense. We need to stabilize her condition immediately. As the medical team fought to save Spica and her unborn child, Keith remained unaware of the crisis unfolding back on Earth. His focus was on the looming confrontation with the Zyrlon fleet, a battle that would determine the fate of both humanity and the Gamelons. The hybrid soldiers, their abilities still evolving in unexpected ways, prepared for the fight of their lives. As the enemy fleet appeared on their long-range sensors, Keith felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The true test of everything they had worked for was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Higher. The distant pinpricks of light on the tactical display transformed into the ominous silhouettes of the Zyrlon fleet. Keith's hands tightened on the control panel as he surveyed the battlefield. All units, prepare for engagement, he commanded, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. Remember your training, trust in each other and in the Prometheus weapons. The hybrid soldiers piloting the specially designed fighters formed up around the main fleet. Their enhanced reflexes and heightened awareness of the battlefield gave them an edge that became immediately apparent as the two forces clashed. Energy beams lanced across space, met by the shimmering barriers of Zerlin shields. But where conventional weapons faltered, the Prometheus-equipped fighters pierced through. Keith watched in awe as the hybrid pilots executed maneuvers that would have been impossible for unmodified humans or Gamelons. Admiral, Keith reported, the hybrids are breaking through their defenses. We have a chance. Admiral Hawkins' gruff voice crackled over the comm. Press the advantage, Captain. We need to push them back before they get any closer to Earth. As the battle intensified, Keith's thoughts briefly flitted to Spica, hoping she was safe back on Earth. He had no way of knowing the crisis unfolding millions of miles away. In a sterile medical bay, Spica lay unconscious on an operating table, her blue skin pale and her bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically. Dr. Elena Rossi and Dr. Zax worked with desperate intensity, surrounded by a team of human and Gamelon medical professionals. Her body can't sustain this accelerated development, Dr. Rossi said, her eyes fixed on the holographic readouts floating above Spica. "We need to deliver the child now." Dr. Zax nodded, his elongated fingers dancing over a series of controls. "Initiating emergency cesarean protocols. This is unprecedented, Elena. We're making history with every incision." As they began the delicate procedure, alarms blared throughout the facility. The Zeron fleet had breached Earth's outer defenses, and the planet was now under direct threat. Back in space, Keith led a daring assault on the Zeron flagship. The massive vessel loomed before them, its alien architecture a maze of twisting spires and pulsating energy conduits. "Bravo and Charlie squadrons, provide cover fire," Keith ordered as he piloted his ship towards a vulnerable-looking section of the flagship's hull. "Alpha Squad, you're with me. We're going in." The hybrid soldiers followed Keith's lead, their enhanced bodies allowing them to withstand G-forces that would have incapacitated normal humans. They breached the Zeron ship's outer defenses in a hail of weapons fire and twisted metal. Inside the alien vessel, Keith and his team found themselves in an environment that defied human logic. Corridors shifted and realigned, while gravity seemed to fluctuate with each step. The hybrid soldiers adapted quickly, their modified physiology allowing them to navigate the chaotic interior with surprising ease. They encountered resistance in the form of Zeron warriors, bizarre, multi-limbed creatures that moved with unsettling speed and precision. The close-quarters combat was intense, with energy weapons and physical blows exchanged in the tight confines of the alien ship. As they fought their way deeper into the flagship, Keith couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the Zerlon's behavior. Their attacks, while fierce, seemed almost robotic, lacking the adaptability he'd expect from a species capable of such advanced technology. Meanwhile, on Earth, a cry pierced the tense atmosphere of the operating room. Dr. Rossi held up a small, wriggling form, a perfect blend of human and gamelon features. The child's skin was a pale blue, with faint luminescent patterns already visible. Its eyes, when they opened, were a striking violet. "Vitals are stabilizing," Dr. Zax reported, his voice filled with wonder. "Both Spica and the child are out of immediate danger." But as the medical team marveled at the newborn, they noticed something extraordinary. The infant's eyes focused with an awareness that should have been impossible for a newborn of either species. Within hours, the child was attempting to communicate through a series of complex bioluminescent patterns. "This is incredible," Dr. Rossi breathed, watching the patterns pulse across the infant's skin. "The hybrid's development is accelerating at an unprecedented rate. We need to study this immediately. It could be the key to unlocking the full potential of human gamelon integration." As the scientists on Earth grappled with the implications of the hybrid child's rapid development, Keith and his team reached the central control room of the Zeron flagship. They burst through the final set of defenses, weapons at the ready, only to find a sight that stopped them in their tracks. The Zeron leaders were there, but they were not what Keith had expected. Instead of the fearsome warriors they had encountered, these creatures looked frail, almost sickly, and wrapped around each of them was a pulsating, otherworldly mass that seemed to glow with malevolent energy. "By the stars," one of the hybrid soldiers whispered. "What are those things?" Keith's mind raced as he took in the scene. The Zeron weren't aggressors, they were victims. Some kind of parasitic entity had taken control of their entire civilization, driving them to war against their will. As Keith grappled with this revelation, a transmission came through from Earth. The Zeron fleet had breached the planet's satellite defense network. Humanity's homeworld lay exposed, with only the battered Earth gamelon fleet standing between it and annihilation. Keith faced an impossible choice. He could destroy the Zeron flagship, potentially crippling their fleet and saving Earth, or he could try to find a way to free the Zerons from the parasite's control, a risky gambit that could cost them everything if it failed. As alarms blared and the ship shuddered under the assault of the Earth gamelon fleet, Keith steeled himself to make a decision that would alter the course of 3 civilizations forever. Keith's mind raced as he absorbed the scene before him. The Zeron leaders, frail and sickly, were entwined with pulsating, otherworldly masses that glowed with malevolent energy. It was clear now the Zerlons weren't the aggressors, but victims of a parasitic entity that had seized control of their entire civilization. As he grappled with this revelation, a transmission crackled through his comm unit. Earth's satellite defense network had been breached. The Zeron fleet, still under the parasite's control, was bearing down on humanity's homeworld. Keith's fingers tightened around his weapon as he weighed his options. Destroying the flagship could cripple the Zeron fleet and save Earth, but it would condemn an entire species to enslavement or death. The alternative, finding a way to free the Zerons, was a gamble that could cost them everything if it failed. Before Keith could voice his decision, one of his hybrid soldiers called out, "Captain, I'm detecting a massive energy signature deeper within the ship. It's unlike anything we've encountered so far." Keith's tactical training kicked in. That has to be it, a central control node for the parasitic entity. If we can neutralize it, we might be able to free the entire Zeron species without further bloodshed. As if in response to their discovery, the ship shuddered violently. The Earth Gamelon fleet's assault was intensifying, and time was running out. "All units, form up," Keith ordered. "We're going after that control node. This is our best shot at ending this war without destroying an entire civilization." The hybrid soldiers moved with fluid grace, their enhanced physiology allowing them to navigate the shifting corridors of the Zeron ship with ease. As they pressed deeper into the vessel, they encountered increasingly fierce resistance. Zeron warriors, their movements jerky and unnatural under the parasite's control, poured out of side passages. Energy weapons flashed, filling the air with the acrid smell of ozone. Keith and his team fought back with a combination of Prometheus weapons and close-quarters combat, their enhanced reflexes giving them a crucial edge. As they neared their objective, Keith noticed something odd about a group of Zeron defenders. Their movements were different, more fluid, more purposeful. One of them locked eyes with Keith, and in that moment, he saw a flicker of conscious intelligence. "Hold your fire!" Keith shouted as the group approached. To his surprise, the lead Zeron raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "You seek to destroy the parasite," the Zeron said, its voice a raspy whisper. "We will help you. A faction of us has been fighting its control from within." Keith nodded, quickly assessing the potential alliance. "We need to reach the control node. Can you guide us?" The partially resistant Zerons joined Keith's team, providing crucial information about the ship's layout and the node's defenses. As they fought their way forward, Keith couldn't help but marvel at the unlikely alliance. Humans, Gamelons, and now Zerons united against a common threat. Meanwhile, on Earth, the situation was growing dire. Spica, still weak from her emergency surgery, insisted on joining the command center. Her unique perspective proved invaluable as she helped coordinate Earth's defenses, her understanding of both human and Gamelon tactics, allowing her to predict and counter Zeron strategies. As she worked, Dr. Elena Rossi burst into the command center, her eyes wide with excitement and disbelief. "Spica, you need to see this. It's about your child." In a secure medical bay, Spica stared in awe at the rapidly growing hybrid child. In mere hours, the infant had developed into a toddler, then a young child, its growth showing no signs of slowing. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Zaks explained, his elongated fingers dancing over holographic displays. "The child's hybrid physiology is accelerating its development at an extraordinary rate. And look at this. Its cognitive functions are off the charts." The child turned to Spica, its violet eyes filled with an intelligence far beyond its apparent years. It began to communicate through complex bioluminescent patterns, conveying ideas and concepts that left even the brilliant scientists speechless. As Earth's outer defenses crumbled under the Zeron assault, military leaders made a controversial decision. Using data gathered from Spica's rapidly developing child, they initiated a risky procedure to accelerate the growth of a new generation of hybrid soldiers. In a heavily guarded facility, rows of advanced gestation chambers hummed with energy. Inside each, a hybrid embryo grew at an alarming rate, maturing in hours instead of years. Scientists monitored the process with a mixture of fascination and trepidation, knowing that this accelerated development could be humanity's last hope. Back on the Zeron flagship, Keith and his team, now bolstered by the rebel Zerlons, finally reached the central control node. The massive chamber pulsed with otherworldly energy, At its center, a writhing, biomechanical construct that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "That's it," the lead rebel Zeron hissed. "The heart of the parasite. Destroy it, and our people will be free." As Keith raised his weapon, he hesitated. The parasite had integrated itself so thoroughly into Zeron physiology. What would happen to those most heavily infected if it were suddenly destroyed? "Wait," Keith called out. "We need to find a way to neutralize it without killing the infected Zyrlons. There has to be a way to sever its control without destroying it entirely." As Keith's team worked to formulate a plan, combining their knowledge of Prometheus weapons with Zeron technology, a transmission came through from Earth. The newly matured hybrid soldiers had been deployed to critical defense points around the planet. Their enhanced abilities and proficiency with Prometheus weapons were turning the tide of several key battles in Earth's atmosphere. With renewed hope, Keith turned back to the task at hand. The fate of 3 civilizations hung in the balance as he prepared to launch the final assault on the parasitic control node. The next few moments would determine not just the outcome of the battle, but the future of interspecies cooperation in the face of cosmic threats. Keith took a deep breath, his enhanced senses taking in every detail of the alien chamber. He raised his hand, signaling his team to ready their weapons. The air crackled with tension as human, Gamelon, and Zeron stood side by side, united against a common enemy. With a nod, Keith gave the order, and the final assault began. The combined force of Prometheus weapons and Zeron technology unleashed a blinding surge of energy that engulfed the parasitic control node. The chamber filled with an otherworldly light, forcing Keith and his team to shield their eyes. As the energy pulse radiated outward, the flagship systems flickered and failed. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the fading glow of emergency lights. Keith's heart raced as he realized the enormity of what they had just done. "Status report," he barked, blinking away the after-images. Before anyone could respond, a violent shudder ran through the ship. The hybrid soldiers steadied themselves against bulkheads as the vessel seemed to groan and twist around them. "The parasite," gasped one of the rebel Zyrlons, its multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. "It's leaving us." Through the viewport, Keith watched in awe as tendrils of ethereal energy erupted from the Zeron ships. The parasitic entity, forcibly ejected from its hosts, dissipated into the void of space like smoke in the wind. As suddenly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. An eerie silence fell over the Zyrlon fleet. One by one, their weapons powered down, leaving Earth's defenders holding their breath in anticipation. "Captain," one of the hybrid soldiers called out, her voice tinged with wonder. "The Zeron ships, they've ceased fire. The attack on Earth has stopped." Keith allowed himself a moment of relief before turning to the liberated Zeron leaders. Their bodies, no longer entangled with the parasitic masses, seemed to sag with exhaustion and bewilderment. "It's over," Keith said softly, extending a hand to the nearest Zeron. "You're free." As the Zeron grasped Keith's hand, a sudden burst of mental energy washed over him. Images and emotions flooded his mind. Gratitude, relief, and a desperate need to make amends. "What was that?" Keith gasped, staggering back. The answer came not from the Zeron, but from a familiar voice crackling through his comm unit. "Keith," Spica's voice rang out, filled with excitement and awe. "It's our child. She's communicating with the Zyrlons, with all of us." On Earth, Spica stood in the command center, her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a young woman who appeared to be in her late teens. The hybrid child, now a striking blend of human and Gamelon features, stood with her eyes closed, bioluminescent patterns pulsing across her pale blue skin. "Her name is Aurora," Spica explained, her voice thick with emotion. "She's established a telepathic link between humans, Gamelons, and Zyrlons. Keith, she's translating everything in real time." Through this unprecedented connection, understanding flowed between the 3 species. The Zerlons' relief at their liberation mixed with shame for the actions taken under the parasite's control. Humanity's fear gave way to cautious hope, and the Gamelons, caught between 2 worlds, felt a surge of pride at the role they had played in bridging the gap. Aurora's eyes snapped open, their violet depths filled with wisdom beyond her years. The Zyrlons wish to withdraw immediately, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of 3 civilizations. They offer technology and knowledge as reparation for the damage caused. Within hours, a ceasefire was negotiated. The Zyrlon fleet began a dignified retreat from Earth's solar system, leaving behind small delegations to begin the process of diplomatic reconciliation. As Keith's team prepared to return to Earth, he couldn't help but feel a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not through destruction, but through understanding and cooperation. The journey back to Earth was a blur of debriefings and medical checkups. As their ship entered the atmosphere, Keith's breath caught in his throat. The planet below was a patchwork of destruction and resilience, smoking craters alongside gleaming cities where humans and Gamelons worked side by side to rebuild. When they finally touched down, Keith was unprepared for the hero's welcome that awaited them. Crowds of humans and Gamelons alike cheered as he and his team disembarked. Reporters jostled for position, their questions drowned out by the roar of the crowd. But Keith had eyes for only one thing. There at the edge of the landing pad stood Spisa. Her blue skin seemed to glow in the sunlight, her eyes shining with unshed tears. And beside her, radiating an aura of calm purpose, stood Aurora. Keith broke into a run, closing the distance between them in moments. He swept Spisa into his arms, holding her tightly as years of tension and fear melted away. When he finally pulled back, he turned to Aurora, marveling at the young woman his newborn daughter had become. "Hello, Father," Aurora said, her voice carrying echoes of both her parents. "We have much to discuss." In the days that followed, Keith found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. A historic treaty was drafted between Earth, the Gamelon homeworld, and the Zyrlon Empire. The document, hailed as a new beginning for interstellar relations, promised an era of unprecedented cooperation and scientific exchange. Aurora, with her unique ability to bridge the gaps between species, became a key figure in these negotiations. Her insights and innate understanding of all 3 cultures proved invaluable in smoothing over potential conflicts and misunderstandings. As the delegation prepared to sign the treaty, Keith stood back, watching with pride as Aurora took her place at the table. Spika squeezed his hand, her luminescent patterns conveying a depth of emotion words couldn't capture. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Spika whispered, leaning against Keith's shoulder. Keith shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not in a million years, but I wouldn't change a thing." As Aurora raised her pen to sign the treaty, Keith felt a surge of hope for the future. The misunderstanding that had sparked this conflict had led to something greater than anyone could have dreamed. A union of 3 species, poised to explore the galaxy together. The ceremony concluded, and the assembled dignitaries broke into small groups, chattering excitedly about the possibilities that lay ahead. Keith and Spisa found themselves momentarily alone, the noise of the celebration fading into the background. Spika turned to Keith, a mischievous glint in her eye that reminded him of their first awkward encounter. "You know," she said, her voice low and teasing, "you never did properly show me what that thing between your legs does." Keith laughed, pulling her close. "Well," he replied, his voice husky with promise, "we have all the time in the world now." As they shared a tender kiss, Keith couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought them to this point. From reluctant allies to lovers, parents, and now, architects of a new galactic order. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. Human, Gamelon, and everything in between.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.